Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Whew, still hot. Alright, today we're going to go over... Well, today we're still in History of Horror. We're still finishing up History of Horror. We've gone all the way backward to the beginning of human history, and now we're going forward. We did a general review forward, and now we're going over certain topics I want to talk about going forward. Last time we did from beginning to current vampires. This time I'm going to do from beginning to current Overreacher plot, being the Overreacher plot as described by Noel Carroll and Philosophy of Horror, which I don't think I have in front of me at the moment. Oh well, we know what we're talking about. When man messes with stuff he shouldn't be messing with. You have the Overreacher plot. I have my bottle of cold iced tea. And I'm almost ready to go. Oh, and the other thing I'm going to be talking about today is... the thing I'm going to be talking about first is the publishing history. From beginning to current. Horror fiction, when it is published, and it took a while for it to be published, was rarely published except in the most inexpensive way possible. Just like horror movies in the 50s, the horror Z pictures and the B pictures, they just wanted to throw some money that they knew would be profitable. And if you think about the most profitable movies of all time, I'm talking here about horror movies. Paranormal Activity was made for nothing and made billions of dollars. Blair Witch Project made with no money and made billions of dollars. Profitable stuff, horror. And usually it's printed on really, really, really cheap paper, or in nowadays ebooks, and makes a lot of people money. Not always the author. Not often the author. But makes other people lots of money. So, I actually made some arts and crafts for publishing history. I made up a little chronology. Because as soon as cheap publication became available, and wanting to make profits, they're actually called chapbooks, which is sort of getting our word cheap from. We're going back a little bit. The meaning of the words changed a bit. But chapbooks, they were started way back. Well, the first Faust book. We're going to be talking about Faust in the Overreacher, of course, because he's an Overreacher. And he's usually the first Overreacher, so the first Faust book was done in 1587, and that was done as a chapbook. And chapbooks went further back than that, even. We're talking about the 16th century here. And Dr. Faustus was probably a bit more... Well, that was more of a broadside because it was... because it was a play. But let's put up here my work. It's sort of, I know it's amateurish, but this is what I was playing around with. Chapbooks. So before the 1800s, the cheapest thing you could get was the chapbook. Really cheap printing. Not huge book, but cheap to make and cheap to sell. Usually only a half penny or a penny in the old British version. And of course, I have this is the maroon color. I have at the top literary magazines, which are going to be coming in to being pretty quickly here too. Those are where the big shots are going to be publishing for the most part, up until the 50s. A little after the 50s. So that's the lighter red. But the rest of these are the cheapest possible things, and usually where you'll find horror. So you have chapbooks ending in about the to the mid 19th century. So the mid 1850s, and they sort of phased into the penny dreadfuls. I'm sure most of you have heard of the penny dreadfuls. They sort of, well, as I said, they cost a penny, and they're full of dread. Yeah. And there's also the half-penny terrors and stuff like that. Dime, in America, dime terrors or 10-cent terrors. Something along those lines. Dime novels. Really cheap to make, really sold cheaply, sold to mostly young people, because most of the horror audience is young, always has been, probably always will be. But, the early cheap books, and actually it was called yellowback paper, which makes me think of the Yellow Pages, which of course are cheaply made. Penny dreadfuls would be about that sort of thing, really cheaply made. Of course, the next one coming along is the pulps. The pulps were made out of wood pulp. It was the cheapest leftover wood from other, when they're baking paper, the leftovers was pulp. Think of an orange. If you squeeze an orange, what you have left over is pulp. If you made paper out of that, not orange pulp, but pulp from wood products, you'd get really not great paper. And you'd print cheap stuff on it, like Conan the Barbarian, or Conan the Cimmerian. Conan the Cimmerian, who's Robert E. Howard, or Robert E. Howard's horror stories, or Robert E. Howard's buddy, H.P. Lovecraft, published in Weird Tales, a pulp. And of course, this is where horror comics start as well. At the, not also shooting for the kid audience, also quite inexpensive. The old school horror comics, essentially on almost newsprint, in the same way that Archie comics are made. It's not the most expensive paper. It's not fancy. And of course, horror comics, as we talked about, got shut down in the mid-50s. Actually, I think my lines are wrong on that a little bit, but that's okay. I can't make them perfect. But that's alright. And then, of course, paperbacks became in there. Your standard mass market paperback, such as this, Feast of Fear, Stephen King. I have the mass market of Danse Macabre someplace. Here it is. Your cheaply made, selling for $6 nowadays. Go back 30 years. $50 50 years actually, since the advent, we're not talking about much money at all. And then you get into, like, the Beatles had a song, Paperback Writer, about a guy who's just writing cheap paperbacks. Or writing a cheap paperback. Oh, it is hot. And then, coming into the late 90s, early 2000s, we had the advent of ebooks. Which is essentially where it's going. A lot of, starting writers and starting horror writers really had to start. Lovecraft published in the pulps exclusively, and he's one of the most influential horror writers ever. Penny Dreadfuls were where a lot of the things I'm talking about in the 1800s and whatnot were published in. Some were published in literary magazines. Poe actually started a literary magazine and was published in it. Dickens, of course, was publishing directly in literary magazines. But, coming in the 70s, and, they were either published in paperbacks, or they were published in short stories. Actually, if you read these, if you get a chance, Bare Bones, Conversations in Terror with Stephen King, I recommended it on the first video, I remember, and Feast of Fear, Conversations with Stephen King, both Tim Underwood and Chuck Miller. There's going to be a lot of interviews with them about, oh, your new story was in Playboy magazine, or your new story was in Penthouse magazine, or you're being interviewed by Penthouse and Playboy, or skin magazines that are not as well known or well respected as Playboy or Penthouse, or usually out of business at that point. At this point, I can't remember what it was. Do I have it? Is there an index in here? That would be helpful. There's not. I don't think I have it in here. Maybe in here. Ooh. I am starting to get mold on this book. That's not good at all. It's too damp. Fangoria. This is Penthouse. So yeah, we're talking about look at that. That's awful. That's mold starting to grow. I shouldn't really touch it. I got to take better care of my books. They've been sitting here on my desk, but it's so moist in this room right now. You have no idea. But Stephen King published a lot of his stories in men's magazines, men's special interest magazines. Skin mags. Not porn mags, but skin mags. Actually, some of Robert E. Howard's stuff, same thing. The ones that didn't get into weird tales, he did write sexier stuff, so he published those in those magazines. If you have actually some of these interviews with Stephen King, he talks about in the 70s, when this is still going on, literary magazines in general are dying now. Most magazines in general are dying now. They're going to online. He talks about what magazines are looking for, what their lengths are, and stuff like that. Sort of in a help to writer's guide sort of thing. But most literary magazines are where the big shots are being. The Dickens was of course, in literary magazines. Poe was in literary magazines. Ambrose Bierce was in literary magazines. Shirley Jackson would be in literary magazines in the 50s area. There's not a whole lot in the between the when pulps die and paperbacks get started, of course we had World War II in that area, but there's not much except literary magazines. Shirley Jackson was publishing in Collier's. This was the Saturday Evening Post with Norman Rockwell era. So Shirley Jackson's short stories would be in Collier's or Harper's or something along those lines. In the Evolution of the Weird Tale, S.T. Joshi, book I've been reading. It's pretty good too, by the way. He talks about like F. Marion Crawford having working on X magazine, X newspaper even. Some of his stuff was published in newspapers back in the 18s. So we could even add another one onto this, that newspapers in the 1850s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Newspapers were a big chunk of the weird fiction. So it's not, this publication history is important to us horror fans because horror is usually relegated to the cheapest form of production. And of course you don't get any cheaper than ebook. As far as producing goes, the guy just puts it on his site and is downloaded for a price, of which the author gets a small chunk. Of course, the publisher, is hosting it, and of course, if it's a major publisher, if you can work your way up to doing paperbacks. So paperbacks are still going on, but it usually takes a couple of successful paperbacks before you get into hardcover area. And then or quality paperbacks. You're following along. You really have, in publishing world, you really have to prove yourself. Stephen King had stuff published in Skin magazines. Then he came out with, he sold Carrie, and published in paperback. I'm almost certain. I don't think it was originally a hardcover. Oh, I might want to check that. Come on, Wikipedia. Oh, no. Come on, Stephen King. Was it first published? I know what the plot is. I don't think that the first publication of Stephen King's Carrie was in hardcover. I think it was in paperback. Cavalier magazine is the other magazine I was thinking of. Yeah, it did mention that in the Stephen King little bit here. Ooh, a nice little picture of a chick on there. Yeah. Yes. I don't know. I know what that is. Come on now. I don't need to know about the first print run of 30,000 copies. First cover edition. First cover edition was Doubleday. It was in hardcover first. I take it back. But then again, this is Stephen King we're talking about, not some schlub. But a lot of people have to work from, most major authors have to work from paperbacks to, quality paperbacks, the oversized size, this size, and then on to hardcovers if they're even more successful. Of course, Carrie is Carrie. Carrie is iconic. So, yeah, it doesn't... And the person who published it for him really went to bat for him, as everybody who knows the story knows. Okay, so publishing history, we have a general idea. This is just a quick visual to help you out with that. Now, we're going to talk about the Overreacher. I have my notes here. The Overreacher is going to be one of the first acceptable forms, as we've mentioned several times. Back in the day, if you wrote too much about horror, horrific stuff, you ran the risk of being accused of being in league with the devil, etc., etc., etc. Faust, the first Faust book, came out in 1587, titled Faust Book. And it was sort of based on a real guy. What was the original guy's name? The real Dr. Faust? He was an alchemist. I'm looking him up as we speak so I can get his years. Faust. Faustian, yes. The real... Yeah. Hmm. 1587 was the first one. It was based on a 14th century Johann Fust, one of actually the business partners of Johann Gutenberg. Oh, there we go. Johann Georg Faust, 1480 to 1540, a magician and alchemist, probably from Nittlingen-Württemberg, who attained a degree in divinity from Heidelberg. Yada yada yada. Did you go away? Minimize that one because I want to look at that later. So 1480 to 1520 or something, and then the guy died. So when the Faust book was written in 57, the guy was already dead for 40 years. So sort of being based on a real guy, you're not going to get in trouble for being in league with the devil. You're just saying, oh no, that guy was in league with the devil, and he's dead. What are you going to do? So the Overreacher is, of course, the point of the Overreacher is to go beyond to mess with things that man was not meant to mess with. There's a bug on my wall and it's annoying me. That's why I keep looking up into that corner. I don't want to smash it. But last time I smashed a bug on camera, the thing closed, so I'm not going to risk it this time. Gross, though. So, Faust, the first Faust book, it was also published anonymously, which also helps a heck of a lot. um, for not being accused of witchcraft. It's like, I don't know who wrote it. It became established because he was saying, hey, you can't. It's not the guy who wrote it. It's the guy who's this magician in the 1400s. And this is the 1500s. The guy's dead. What are you going to do? You could burn him as a witch, but he's already dead. So it doesn't make any sense to burn him as a witch. So 1587, Faust book. The first Faust story. About a guy who sells his soul to the devil for knowledge and power. Then you have Dr. Faustus, 1604 by Christopher Marlowe, play based on Faust. Marlowe was one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, or around that time. Maybe even predecessor a bit. A very popular play at the time, and of course, he's not going to get in trouble because it's based on a previous story that's fairly well known, and of course, it's still based on a guy who's already been dead for now about 150 years. And then about this time, the mania for, well, the 30 Years' War, we're going to be going into more mania especially on the continent, for burning people, in league with the devil. So you're not out of the woods yet, but Faust is pretty safe bet. You could tell a Faust story, and Marlowe did. Then you go into the Age of Reason, and of course, most horror stories fall away because all that's left is hyperrealism stories. Then comes the Romantic Age, where people get sick of the Enlightenment, and they say, "Oh, I don't want the Enlightenment anymore. I want my, ghosts and goblins and whatnot." So Faust makes a return by Goethe. Probably the most famous Faust now that we're talking about. Still the same story, still based on the whatever, it's just getting better. So Goethe tells his tale. Pretty much right after that, Frankenstein comes out by Shelley. Now, Shelley, of course, isn't saying a guy makes a deal with the devil and then realizes he shouldn't have done that and has to back out of it or find a way out of it. Frankenstein is about a guy has too much faith in his own powers, and he goes into areas blindly that man was not meant to tread. He overreaches. Obviously, it's the preeminent Overreacher. So, that's 1818. This is it. I mean, on this list, I'm usually just doing original Overreachers. I know there's more that remakes of all these as well, especially in the films. But I'm just talking about original stories. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886. Again, a man shouldn't be messing with what he's messing with. He shouldn't be trying to get the best of both worlds. Of course, he's the hypocrite who wants to go to the shows in London and also be seen to be above the shows in London, to be better than that. He wants to be seen not drinking good wine, but he wants to drink good wine. He's a hypocrite. So he creates the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, but he shouldn't be messing with this sort of stuff. Man was not meant to. And of course it comes back to bite him. The Golem, 1914, Myrink. Of course, the Golem story starts way back the story of it starts from the time when the actual rabbi was in Prague, who is supposed to have done it. 1500s, late 1500s, or mid 1500s, around there, give or take. Rabbi Loew, Loew, I think was the name. But The Golem by Meyrink was the first novelization. Of course, it was made into movies as well. This was 1914. It's not that it's still man not messing with stuff he's not supposed to be messing with. A guy playing God, he's putting the name of God in a lump of clay, so the lump of clay turns into becomes animated. Right, so excuse me. I can't. Come on. I think it might be coming down with the cold too, which would be cool. There's not so much a boomerang in the Golem. The Golem doesn't turn on people so much. It's a different kind of story, but it's still men messing with stuff they're just not supposed to be messing with. And that comes into context a little bit more. Herbert West Reanimator by Lovecraft. It's an update on the Frankenstein. It is essentially Frankenstein remade. And of course this was done again and again and again. But it's Lovecraft, so it's definitely worth a mention. I actually did listen to these fairly recently, and they're pretty good. Kind of racist. You're going to get that in Lovecraft. Hate to say otherwise, but it's unfortunately you're going to get it in Lovecraft. But good story. Donovan's Brain, 1942 by Siodmak. I talked about this a couple of times. The guy takes the brain out of the body and puts it in a vat of chemicals. The brain belonging to Donovan. And starts communicating with it telepathically. And then the brain starts taking over his brain, the scientist's mind, and making him do stuff like trying to run over a little girl. Until he breaks the vat of chemicals. And finally on the list here, I have The Stand by King, 1978 or 1990, as I read it. I say if you're going to read it, but only going to read it once, I recommend reading the unabridged version. Because I read it, and I was like, man, if I'm going to read it, I'm going to go whole hog and read it, the full thing. But it's a long book. I might be interested enough. It was a really good book. I might be interested enough to read it abridged, the original. I might not. I'm not sure. It is a long book even then, but it's 400 more pages or something like that with the unabridged. Captain Trips is the disease in The Stand, and it was made in a military base. I don't know how much more detail is in the unabridged than the abridged. This may be in the abridged version. I'm getting the terms confused in my head, confabulated. They might have the information in the abridged version, or it might just be in the unabridged. About the creation of Captain Trips, or it might be mostly in the movie. One of the movie versions, the one I saw with who's the actors? There's a couple of actors. Molly Ringwald? No. Maybe. Rob Lowe? I think it was Rob Lowe. Gary Sinise. I'm pretty sure it was Gary Sinise. Anyway, and I think Stephen King was twice in it as well. Once as a dead scientist in the lab, and once someplace else. I don't remember where. Oh, once as one of the guys in Denver. Yeah. Anyway, Captain Trips. Men should be messing with making biological disease weapons, and guess what? It kills the world. That was my novels section. But I forgot a few that I wanted to talk about. Stepford Wives. It's not so much, it doesn't boomerang on the creators of the Stepford Wives, but it's certainly horror. Ira Levin. The novel was 1972. The film versions were 1975 and 2004. And even Rosemary's Baby, another Ira Levin, the 1967 book and the 1968 film. I do have the film here. Mia Farrow, of course. The Rosemary, of course, didn't make a deal with the devil. The old people did. the neighbors. The satanic neighbors. The elderly satanic neighbors. Right. It didn't really boomerang on them. It boomeranged on Rosemary and the baby. Okay, so also, of course, at the advent of movies, the first couple were instantly made into movies. Frankenstein was made in the movies as early as 1910 with the production company by Thomas Edison. And then, of course, in the 20s, 1920, the Golem was made into a movie in, I don't know if it was Germany or, pardon me, Eastern Europe, but Jekyll and Hyde was made into several versions up to the 40s, and it was the first time a horror movie won an Academy Award for Best Actor, Frederick March, in 1942. Herbert West was made into a movie, The Reanimator. Donovan's Brain was made into the movie about 3 times. The Stand was made into a movie and a miniseries. Faust is probably made into a movie too, but I don't remember it. I can't imagine it wasn't made into a movie. Some version of Faust. But the ones that during the 50s and 40s and 50s, of course, King talks about it quite a bit in Dance Macabre. He talks about techno horror. What was it? Actually, he talks about it in 153 to 192 in the British version, anyway. Techno horror, which is technology running amok. Now, I have the movies here. Techno horror, big bug movies, and political horror, which borders on techno horror in some cases. Big bug movies is, of course, radiation getting into X animal, bringing it up to several stories tall, and destroying whatever city. Or terrorizing whatever countryside. So, but the Quatermass experiment was the mad scientist updated, and King talks about the Quatermass experiment quite a bit. He calls it the creeping unknown. This is a Hammer film. I'm almost positive they're all Hammer films. It was a television series as well in England. A rocket scientist sends a rocket up to space and comes down, and two of the guys are dead, and the other guy's being catatonic. And then he starts becoming moldy. He's a space becomes space mold. That was 1953. Gojira is 1954. Gog is also 1954. That's the robot with pincers. Gog and Magog, who are terrorizing a space colony thing in the future. Because people trusted in technology, and technology betrayed them and goes crazy, runs amok. And then Man with the X-ray Eyes, a guy puts super special eye drops in his eyes and starts seeing things, goes to Vegas and looks through people's cards so he knows what their hands are, and looks up girls' skirts and stuff like that. And then he starts seeing more and more stuff, so it's boomerang. It's a true boomerang. But I had another one that I forgot to put on there, but I thought of earlier. It's actually one I mentioned in the Overreacher series in general, is Fritz Lang's Metropolis. The guy creates something not caring that it's going to boomerang. He wants it to boomerang. It's designed to boomerang. It's designed to be destruction. This is also sort of the Voldemort thing. He's going beyond what people are supposed to be doing as well, wizards. But he doesn't care. The Fritz Lang villain doesn't care about the destruction. He wants the destruction. That's 1927, so that's Fritz Lang's Metropolis. And then, of course, remakes of the remakes. Actually, ending. Most recent good one that I saw was this, Subject 2. I did mention this a few times too. Good little Frankenstein story. Guys trying to beat death through chemicals and what are the things supposed to be called? Nanites? Nanobiological things that repair you. Essentially turning someone into the Borg. Nanotechnology, nanotechnological stuff that's heals your body. So the guy can't die, but the doctor keeps killing him and seeing the guy get better, and he's when he least expects it, he kills him again. Kind of good. It's good and suspenseful. It's good horror. Not necessarily scary, but it's good stuff. Anyway, I think that's it. That's the Overreacher. There is a lot of big bugs out there, and there's a lot of techno horror. I say 153 to 192. War of the Worlds is techno horror as well. The King, the Thing, not the King, which isn't a man going too far. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Amityville. That's, oh, 153. Let's go back to that. I don't think that the index was made properly in this version. The Body Snatcher, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, House of Horrors of the Black Museum. Oh, well, eco-disaster as well. The eco-disaster prophecy, pollution. It's not man going overreaching, but it's subject of man doing stuff he's not supposed to be doing. Comes back to bite man in the ass. Pollution causes monster fish and monster things going on in that area. Phase 4, some radiation causes ants to become super intelligent. Yeah, this index is not good. Oh, here we go. Colossus. Gog, which I talked about. Prophecy, which I talked about. The Horror at Party Beach, where dumping nuclear waste in the ocean causes a monster to rise out of it and start killing teenagers. 2001 would also fit in that category, being that man shouldn't be trusting too much in technology. Big Bugs, the Andromeda Strain. Night of the Living Dead would be a techno-horror, in that man shouldn't be sending stuff out, or man needs to be careful about sending stuff out into space. Technology is the cause of the zombie uprising in Night of the Living Dead. Or it's implied that much, anyway. Not necessarily Overreacher in the same sense as mad scientist-y Overreachers of, Faust, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, Donovan's Brains Scientist, Herbert West. But it's that sort of thing. Of course, going through the generations, the concept is going to change. Even Faust, if I did one of these for Faust alone, if you look up Faust in Wikipedia, and I recommend you do that, there's been about 15 operas on Faust. There's been about half a dozen, probably a dozen ballets. There's been dozens of stories, dozens of TV shows pilots, dozens of TV show episodes, rather, etc., etc., etc. There's just so many Faust things. And of course, from generation to generation, the concept changes slightly. Difference between Faust Buch, the first one, and Goethe's Faust, or even Marlowe and Goethe's Faust, they're over 200 years apart, 1604 and 1808, as you can see here. Quite a bit of difference between those two. And then, of course, it switches around, and you have these technologically things. Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde. So the Overreacher, and then coming into, Ant-Man with the X-ray eyes. The Faustian element is there, or the Overreacher element is there. Even Stepford Wives. It doesn't come back to bite the men. It comes back to bite the women. The men don't seem to mind. Creepy, but whatever. Okay, folks. I think I'm planning on doing one more. I might think of something awesome that is say, hey, I want to do this instead, or as well. But I'm planning on doing one more history of horror on the history of directors, because I made a point several times that, man, all these influential directors either started in horror movies or did a lot of horror movies first, early in their career, or throughout their career. So I want to do a horror movie director thing. And then we'll be going on to horror anthropology, which I'm really looking forward to. I only have, I think, 3 or 4 videos planned for that. When I started, I was only planning on doing 1, but now it's blossomed quite a bit, and I'm just hoping someone else will take over on it, because this is something I'm really interested in, but I don't have the anthropology chops to really pull it off all that well. But that's going to be coming up really soon too. The chops I do have, I'll certainly put into it as much as possible. So, good night, folks. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis. Have a great night.